The first thing I registered was the smell. Cedarwood and something else. A clean, dry scent like old paper. It was a pleasant way to return to the land of the living. Far better than the usual sterile tang of a medbay or the scorched metal perfume of a catastrophic system failure. Both of which, my throbbing head assured me, I had recently experienced. My eyes cracked open. The light was soft, filtered through a paper lantern hanging from a dark wooden beam above me. I was lying on a cot that was surprisingly comfortable, covered by a thick, woven blanket. My left arm, from the elbow down, was encased in a sleek, black cast that felt impossibly light. A quick, painful inventory confirmed a constellation of bruises, a head that felt like a kicked drum, and a profound sense of having made a series of very poor life choices. The last clear memory was of the hyperspace lane peeling apart like old paint, the alarms screaming a song of imminent doom, and the universe turning into a nauseating kaleidoscope of light and terror. My ship, the Wanderlust, my ticket to a quiet retirement on a moon with 3 suns and no extradition treaty. My life savings compressed into an admittedly aging but beloved freighter. A dull ache started in my chest that had nothing to do with the crash. My retirement plan had just gone up in a glittery, explosive puff of logic. A figure moved into my peripheral vision, and I turned my head slowly. She was tall, slender, with an air of professional calm. Her features were sharp, intelligent, and framed by hair the color of midnight. Protruding from that hair were 2 pointed, furry ears that twitched slightly, tracking the sound of my movement. A long, elegant tail tipped with white swished gently behind her. So, not human. That much was clear. "You are awake," she said. Her voice was like smooth, cool stone. "Good. We were uncertain if human physiology would respond to our sedatives." "Seems to have worked," I croaked, my throat dry. "Where am I and who, if you don't mind me asking, are we?" "You are in the infirmary of the Kitsukami War Conservatory," she stated, her golden eyes appraising me with an unnerving lack of emotion. "I am Dr. Eris, and we are the Kitsune." Kitsukami. The name didn't ring any bells, which meant I was spectacularly off any known commercial routes. A war conservatory sounded unfun, especially for an unarmed civilian pilot whose only combat experience involved aggressive negotiations with port authorities over docking fees. "You have a compound fracture of the ulna and radius, severe concussion, and extensive soft tissue damage," she continued, tapping a translucent data slate that hovered beside her. "You are lucky to be alive. Adrian Hale." She knew my name. They must have salvaged my identification from the wreck. "My ship," I asked, dreading the answer, "is a rather artistic collection of scrap metal, currently occupying a large portion of the lower training grounds." She replied, without a hint of sympathy. "It is a miracle it did not detonate on impact." I closed my eyes. Scrap metal. There it was. Goodbye. Triple sunsets. Hello. Crippling debt. The memory of another fire, another field of wreckage, flickered behind my eyelids. The blasted landscape of Cygnus X-1. The smell of burnt earth and death. The official report called it a colonial munitions accident. I called it a massacre. I had been a cargo hauler then, too. Just a kid, delivering atmospheric processors. My ship was docked for repairs miles away when it happened. I saw the flashes, felt the ground shake. I was one of the few who walked away. That memory was a ghost that had followed me for 20 years, fueling a deep, abiding distrust of any and all military apparatus. And now I had woken up in the heart of one. Perfect. "There was another survivor," Dr. Eris said, her tone shifting for the first time, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "A child. We found her in a damaged stasis pod in your cargo hold." My blood ran cold. A child. There were no passengers on my manifest. I was hauling machine parts and luxury textiles. Nevertheless, she was there, an orphan from the raids on the Outer Rim colonies. She is also here, in the next room. She has been distressed. Before I could process this, a small commotion erupted from the adjacent room. A high-pitched cry, followed by the soft, urgent voices of other kitsune. The screen door to my room slid open, and a tiny figure darted inside, trailing two frazzled-looking medics. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. A mess of tangled black hair, huge, terrified golden eyes, and a single, fluffy foxtail drooping with fear. Her face was streaked with tears. "Nico, you must return to your bed," one of the medics said, her voice firm but gentle. The little girl, Nico, ignored her. Her wild eyes scanned the room and locked onto me. It was a look of pure, primal panic, a cornered animal seeking any port in a storm. She scrambled towards my cot, dodging the medics, and before I could react, she clambered up and buried her face in my side, her small body trembling. One of the medics reached for her. Nico flinched and, in a gesture of pure, delirious instinct, she turned her head and bit down lightly on my good hand. It was barely a pinch, her teeth just grazing the skin, but the effect on the room was instantaneous and absolute. The two medics froze, their hands hovering in midair. Dr. Eris's professional mask shattered, her eyes widening in shock. They all stared at my hand, now with a tiny, damp indentation on the back, as if I had just spontaneously grown a second head. "By the sacred fire," one of the medics whispered, her voice filled with awe. Dr. Eris recovered first, her expression a complex mixture of astonishment and something that looked suspiciously like strategic calculation. She shooed the other medics out with a flick of her wrist. Nico, her small burst of energy spent, had gone limp against me, her breathing evening out into the rhythm of sleep. "What was that?" I asked, utterly bewildered. I gently extricated my hand. "Is she all right?" "She will be," Dr. Eris said, her gaze fixed on me. "You, however, have just become a rather significant complication. Adrian Hale." She took a deep breath. "In our culture, when a child without a den marks an adult with a bonding bite, it is a sacred right. It is a plea for protection, an instinctive claim. She has, in essence, chosen you as her temporary guardian, her den dad." I stared at her, then at the sleeping child curled up against my ribs. Den dad. I wasn't even a pet person. I had a notoriously black thumb with plants. The only thing I had ever successfully nurtured was a sourdough starter, and that ended in a small, contained fire. "You have got to be kidding me," I said. It was a delirious nibble from a scared kid. "It doesn't mean anything." "To you, perhaps," she said, her voice regaining its cool authority. "To us, it means everything. The bond is considered sacred. To break it would be a grave offense." This was getting better and better. I was broke, stranded on an uncharted planet full of fox people with a broken arm. And now, I was the reluctant foster father to a traumatized orphan who communicated via light dentistry. My life had officially become a farce. My soft confinement began the next day. The headmistress of the Kitsukami War Conservatory, Kale Oren, was a woman who radiated authority, the way a star radiates heat. She was older than Dr. Eris, with streaks of silver in her auburn hair and eyes that seemed to see right through you to the core of your inadequacies. Her office was a masterpiece of minimalist austerity, all dark wood and clean lines, overlooking a vast training ground where young kitsune women moved through combat drills with terrifying grace. "Mr. Hale," she began, her voice a low, precise hum. "You present us with a unique situation, a foreign national, a civilian, crashing into a high-security military installation, for the sake of galactic diplomacy. What little of it reaches this far. I cannot simply lock you in a cell. However, for the security of this institution, I cannot let you wander freely. So, I am a prisoner, I asked, shifting in the surprisingly comfortable chair. Nico was in the infirmary, sleeping peacefully for the first time since she arrived, a fact that seemed to weigh heavily in my favor. You are a guest, Kale Oren corrected smoothly. A guest with restricted privileges. You will be housed in the foreign dignitary quarters. You will be assigned a liaison who will act as your guide and minder. Your needs will be met. But you will not leave the conservatory grounds. Am I clear? Crystal, I said. And this Dendad business? A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. An ancient, and some would say outdated tradition. But it is a powerful one among the clans. The child, Nico, has claimed you. For the sake of her stability, and to avoid upsetting a significant portion of my faculty and student body, we will honor it. For now, she will be your responsibility. My heart sank, so it was real. I am not qualified to take care of a child, I protested, especially not a kitsune child. You will learn, she said dismissively. Your liaison will assist you. She touched a comm panel on her desk. Send in Sablefire. The door slid open, and a young woman entered. She was, I had to admit, stunning. Fiery red hair was tied back in a severe ponytail. Her uniform was immaculate, and she carried herself with the coiled intensity of a predator. 2 sharp ears stood at attention, and a magnificent, bushy red tail twitched with irritation. This had to be the top of the food chain around here. Airy Sablefire, Kale Oren announced. Our top cadet. She is in her final year. She has excelled in every field of study, from tactical command to unarmed combat. She will be your liaison. Ari Sablefire's golden eyes swept over me, and the look in them could have curdled milk. It was pure, undiluted contempt. Headmistress, she said, her voice crisp and sharp. With all due respect, my duties are to my training. I am preparing for my final field trials. I do not have time to babysit a primitive. Ouch. Primitive was a new one. I had been called a lot of things, but that had a certain flair. Your final field trials, Sablefire, are about adapting to unexpected variables on the battlefield, Kale Oren countered, her voice dropping a degree. Consider him an unexpected variable. You will watch him. You will watch the child. You will ensure neither of them compromises the security of this conservatory. That is an order. Airy Sablefire's jaw tightened. The tips of her ears flattened against her head. For a moment, I thought she might refuse, but then she gave a stiff, formal bow. Yes, headmistress. Her glare promised me a world of pain. This was going to be a beautiful, harmonious relationship. My new life was a strange blend of polite imprisonment and surreal fatherhood. My quarters were comfortable, but the doors only opened with Ari's authorization. Nico was moved in with me, a small cot set up in the corner. She was a quiet, watchful child who trailed me like a small shadow. The bonding bite, it seemed, was a one-time affair. She now communicated mostly through tugs on my sleeve and by handing me things she found interesting, a shiny rock, a strange beetle, a discarded gear from a training drone. Ari was a constant, disapproving presence. She followed me everywhere, her arms crossed, her expression a permanent scowl. She clearly believed I was one step away from keeling over from sheer human weakness. The air here is thinner than your homeworld standard, she informed me on our first morning walk. Try not to exert yourself and faint. I will do my best to remain conscious, I assured her. The gravity is 12% higher. Be mindful of your fragile bone structure. Noted. We'll try not to crumble into dust. My introduction to conservatory life came in the form of a survival strategy class. Kale Oren had decided that to properly assess the threat I posed, They needed to understand my capabilities. So, she dropped me into a class full of 16-year-old warrior women. It was like being a hamster thrown into a cage of very focused, very athletic cats. I walked into the outdoor amphitheater, with Aerie trailing me like a particularly judgmental storm cloud. 24 pairs of sharp, intelligent eyes swiveled to me. Whispers erupted, ears twitched, tails swished. I was the subject of intense, predatory curiosity. The instructor, a stern kitsune with a scar across her muzzle, eyed me coolly. "Class, we have a guest, Adrian Hale. He is a human. He will be observing today." She said the word human, like it was a particularly uninteresting type of fungus. The day's lesson was on tracking and ambush. They were studying how to hunt a particular native creature, a six-legged predator with a keen sense of smell. "The key is to mask your scent and approach from downwind," the instructor explained, pointing to a diagram of wind patterns. "Its olfactory senses are its greatest strength. They are nearly impossible to fool." The students nodded, taking notes. I felt a dozen pairs of eyes on me, sizing me up. They probably thought I smelled like easy prey. I raised my good hand. "Excuse me." The instructor's ears swiveled towards me. "Yes, Mr. Hale." "Where I am from," I said, choosing my words carefully. "We have creatures with a similar sense of smell, and we fool them all the time." A ripple of amusement went through the class. A girl in the front row with silver fur snickered. Even Ari looked at me with a fresh wave of pity. "Indeed," the instructor said, her tone dripping with skepticism. "And how does your fragile species accomplish this feat?" "We use its strength against it," I said. "We don't try to mask our scent. We overwhelm it. We use irritants, ground peppers, concentrated acids, things that burn the sinuses and effectively shut down their sense of smell completely. They become blind, and then you can just walk right up to them." The amphitheater went silent. The students stared at me, a new light in their eyes. The simple, low-tech brutality of the idea seemed to be something that had never occurred to them. They were warriors, trained in elegance and honor. I was a civilian, trained in efficiency and getting the job done. The instructor blinked, considering it. "An unorthodox approach," she admitted slowly. "Crude, but potentially effective. An interesting perspective. Human." It wasn't much, but it was a start. As I left, the whispers that followed me sounded a little less like they were discussing prey, and a little more like they were discussing a puzzle. Days bled into a routine. I spent my time exploring my limited world, playing simple games with Nico, and enduring Ari's silent, simmering resentment. I learned that Kitsune society was built on a rigid code of honor, clan loyalty, and martial prowess. Everything was a competition, a test of strength and skill. My human approach to problems, relying on shortcuts, leverage, and what Aerie called undignified cunning, was a constant source of friction. One afternoon, the entire conservatory was called to assemble on the main parade ground. It was some kind of formal review, with banners flying and the student body arranged in perfect, silent ranks. Kyle Oren stood on a raised dais, observing her army of young women. It was an impressive, if slightly terrifying, display of discipline. Ari stood beside me at the edge of the grounds, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on the proceedings. Nico held my hand, distracted by a colorful beetle on the ground. The pomp and circumstance of it all provided the perfect cover. For days, I had been watching the crews cleaning up the wreckage of the Wanderlust. They had cordoned it off, but they were not security experts. They were groundskeepers, and they had missed something. Tucked under a twisted piece of fuselage, half buried in the dirt, was a small, scorched orange box. My ship's flight recorder. Its emergency beacon was fried, but the hardened memory core might have survived. "I need to use the restroom," I murmured to Aerie. She gave me a suspicious glare, The facilities are on the other side of the quad. I know. I have a sensitive system. Comes from being a primitive. Her lips thinned, but she gestured impatiently. Be quick about it. I walked away, keeping my pace casual, moving around the edge of the crowd. As soon as I was out of her direct line of sight, I ducked behind a row of manicured hedges and sprinted towards the crash site. The orange box was right where I had seen it. I pried it from the dirt. The lock on the access panel was fused, but it was a standard commercial model. I pulled out the small multi-tool I always carried in my pocket. The knife was useless, but the file was just right. Then, I reached into another pocket and pulled out a small, metal hair clip. Nico had left it on my nightstand that morning. It was a clumsy process, especially one-handed. My fingers fumbled with the clip, trying to find the tumblers inside the lock. Behind me, the sound of 1,000 booted feet marching in perfect unison echoed across the ground. Time was running out. Just as I heard the commands for the core to be dismissed, I felt the last tumbler click. The panel sprang open. I pulled out the data core, a crystalline shard no bigger than my thumb, and shoved it into my pocket. I kicked the empty box back under the wreckage and ran, emerging from the hedges just as Ari turned, her eyes scanning the crowd for me. That was not quick, she said, her voice sharp with suspicion. Long walk, I panted, trying to sound nonchalant. Big quad. She did not look convinced, but the ceremony was over, and students were swarming the grounds. She herded Nico and me back towards our quarters. Later that night, after Nico was asleep, I sat in the dark, the data core in my hand. I had no way to read it. The tech here was alien, and all my personal gear had been confiscated. But Cale Oren had, in a moment of either generosity or oversight, allowed me a personal data slate for educational purposes. It was locked down, firewalled, and monitored. But it was a computer, and any computer can be broken. It took me 3 hours. Their security was good, but it was designed to repel a frontal assault, not a patient, civilian hacker using backdoors left over from obsolete commercial software. I finally gained root access. I plugged the data core into the slate's diagnostic port. Files began to load. Most of it was corrupted. Flight telemetry, engine performance, cargo logs all scrambled, but one partition was intact. A single, encrypted file labeled only with a naval designation. I bypassed the encryption. It was flimsy, civilian-grade stuff. The file opened. It was a mission directive, a battle plan, Operation Emberfall. My breath caught in my throat. Emberfall. The name of the colonial tragedy. The massacre at Cygnus X-1. I scanned the document, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was a detailed plan for a military action, ostensibly to quell a local insurrection. But the tactical language was chillingly familiar. The acceptable casualty parameters, the feints designed to draw civilians into kill zones, the specific algorithms used for targeting and collateral damage assessment. It was all wrong. This was not a plan for pacification. It was a plan for extermination. And then I saw it. Buried deep in the command protocols was a string of code, a unique signature in the tactical decision-making matrix. It was a flourish, an elegant but unnecessarily complex piece of logic that prioritized psychological impact over strategic necessity. I had seen it before, in classified analyses of other fringe conflicts. It was the calling card of a shadowy, unofficial group known only as the War Council. They were whispers, bogeymen in the intelligence community, a cabal that believed in shaping galactic politics through precisely engineered atrocities. And their signature tactic was the recruitment and indoctrination of young, promising soldiers, often minors, turning them into perfect, unquestioning weapons. They would find gifted children, erase their pasts, and rebuild them in their own image. This data core did not just contain a battle plan. It contained proof that Emberfall was not an accident, It was a deliberate act of mass murder, orchestrated by the same group that specialized in turning children into soldiers. And I had crashed into a school that did exactly that. The coincidence was too great, too monstrous to ignore. My path, which had been a blurry, uncertain mess, suddenly snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. 2 days later, I was summoned by Cale Oren again. Ari escorted me, her silence even heavier than usual. She seemed to know something was happening. The headmistress was not alone. Standing beside her desk was a man, the first male kitsune I had seen. He was old, his fur almost entirely white, and he wore the ornate robes of a high-ranking official. His eyes were sharp and intelligent. "Adrian Hale," Cale Oren said, her voice devoid of its usual condescension. It was neutral. "This is Elder Kai, a representative from our Board of Governors." I nodded respectfully. Elder Kai studied me for a long moment. "Your analysis of the Gathar tracking problem in the survival class was insightful," he said, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "Unconventional, but insightful." "I just thought of a different way to solve the problem," I said. "Indeed," Cale continued, taking over. "It has come to our attention that your civilian background, your primitive perspective, as some might call it, could be a valuable asset. We are constantly seeking to improve our strategic doctrines by studying potential adversaries. An outside view is invaluable." I felt a trap closing around me, but I did not see the shape of it yet. "Therefore," she said, "with the sponsorship of several influential clans, we are creating a new, temporary program within the conservatory, the Foreign Threat Analysis Initiative. You will lead it." I blinked. "I will what?" "You will analyze our current tactics and doctrines from your human perspective. You will identify weaknesses a foreign power might exploit. You will report your findings directly to me." Her eyes were like chips of ice. "In return for this service, you will be granted greater access to our facilities. And your parental duties to the child, Nico, will be formally recognized and supported by the conservatory." It was a cage disguised as an opportunity. They wanted to use my brain, to pick it apart for weaknesses, all while keeping me under their thumb. "And Cadet Sablefire will be your assigned partner in this initiative," Cale added, almost as an afterthought. "She will be your second in command, your bodyguard, and she will report on your progress. Her final field trials will be waived in lieu of this assignment." Ari's face was a perfect mask of horror. Her ears were pinned back so far they nearly touched. Her tail was ramrod straight. She looked at Cale, then at me, and I could see the silent, screaming protest in her eyes. This was not an honor. It was an insult, a punishment. She was being shackled to the weak, undignified human. Cale Oren looked at me, her expression unreadable. "Do you accept this position, Adrian Hale?" The old Adrian, the one who just wanted to retire and watch his triple sunsets, would have laughed in her face. He would have told her to find some other fool. But the old Adrian hadn't held proof of a war crime in his hand. He hadn't seen the tactical signature of the monsters who haunted his nightmares. And he hadn't become the unlikely guardian of a little girl who had lost everything, probably to the same people. Leaving was no longer an option. Running was impossible. Here, inside the machine, I had a chance to protect this strange, quiet child who had inexplicably chosen me, and a chance to find the truth, to pull on the thread that started at Emberfall and had, against all odds, led me here. I looked at Ari's furious face, then at Cale's calculating one. I thought of Nico, sleeping in our quarters, her small hand probably clutching the smooth stone I had given her. I thought of the ghosts of Cygnus X1. "I accept," I said. My new office was a renovated storage closet. Cale Oren had called it the Foreign Threat Analysis Strategic Center, a title so grand it could only be masking a profound lack of windows. Ari stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression suggesting she had just smelled something awful. To be fair, the room did have a lingering scent of old floor polish and despair. "This is our command center," she asked, her voice laced with acid. "I prefer to think of it as a tactical think tank," I replied, running my hand over the dusty surface of the small metal desk they had provided. "It is cozy, promotes close collaboration." Her tail twitched in violent irritation. "My collaboration with you will consist of ensuring you do not trip over your own feet and compromise state security." "I appreciate the vote of confidence," I said. "First order of business for the new department coffee. Does this planet have coffee?" She stared at me as if I had just asked her to explain the concept of color. "We have nutrient paste and tea." "It is going to be a long war," I muttered. My first official duty as a threat analyst was to observe and participate in a first-year training exercise den defense. The objective was simple. A small team of cadets had to defend a designated area, a simulated den, from multiple waves of attackers. My role was to command one of the defending teams. It was Cale Oren's idea of a test, a way to see my unorthodox mind in action. It was also, I suspected, a way to publicly humiliate me. I stood in the simulated den, a network of shallow trenches and low rock walls in the middle of a dusty training field. My team consisted of 4 very young, very nervous cadets who looked at me like I was a strange, flightless bird that had wandered into their nest. Across the field, 2 squads of older, more experienced students were preparing their assault. Ari watched from an observation tower, her silhouette sharp and unforgiving against the pale sky. "Sir, one of my cadets, a girl with pale blonde fur named Rena, asked timidly, 'What is your strategy? Shall we establish overlapping fields of fire from the primary trench?' I looked at the training rifles they carried. They fired focused beams of light that registered on the sensors woven into their uniforms. Standard military stuff. I looked at the attackers, who were already fanning out, their movements fluid and predatory. They were faster, stronger, and had senses I could barely comprehend. Playing by their rules would be suicide. "New plan," I said, pulling a small sack from the supply crate. "Forget the trenches. I need your canteens." They exchanged confused glances, but complied. I had spent the previous night in the mess hall, trading a week's worth of dessert rations for a kilogram of their hottest chili powder. The cook, a burly kitsune with a sense of humor, had found my request hilarious. I mixed the fiery red powder with water, creating a thick, irritating sludge. Then, I took the empty ration cans and a spool of thin, strong wire from my pack. For the next 10 minutes, I had the cadets stringing tripwires all around our position, each connected to a pair of cans filled with pebbles. I placed other cans, filled with my chili slurry, on unstable ledges above the main approaches to the den. A few well-placed tug lines ran back to our position. It was the kind of thing you learn when you have to keep scavengers away from your ship's power conduits on backwater planets. "What is this?" Rena asked, looking at the primitive network of strings and cans. "An early warning system." "Something like that," I said. "Now, get down, plug your noses with some cloth, and wait for my signal." The assault began. The first squad came in low and fast, moving with a silent, synchronized grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. They flowed over the terrain like water, their senses on high alert. One of them snagged a tripwire. The clatter of pebbles in the tin cans was pathetically quiet compared to the shriek of a plasma rifle. But in the tense silence of the field, it was as loud as a gunshot. The entire attacking squad froze. They had been detected. Their stealthy approach was ruined. Their ears swiveled, trying to pinpoint the source of the crude noise. As they hesitated, looking for the source of the sound, I gave a sharp tug on one of my lines. A can of chili slurry tipped over, splashing down on the rocks right in front of them. The fine mist of atomized capsaicin hung in the air. The effect was instantaneous and spectacular. The kitsune's greatest weapon, Their hypersensitive sense of smell became their greatest weakness. They recoiled, sputtering and choking. One of them dropped her rifle, her hands flying to her muzzle as she sneezed violently. Another stumbled back, shaking her head, her eyes watering. Their sense of smell was so acute that a dose of pure irritant like that was the equivalent of a flashbang grenade going off in their sinuses. They were completely disoriented. "Now," I said calmly to my team. The 4 young cadets rose from their cover and opened fire. The disoriented attackers were easy targets. One by one, their uniform sensors lit up, signaling a successful hit. The first squad was eliminated without firing a single shot. The second squad, seeing what had happened, tried a different approach. They charged, relying on speed and overwhelming force. They triggered more noisemakers, and I dumped more chili slurry on them. The result was the same. The air in front of our den became a spicy, debilitating fog. My team picked them off with methodical precision. The exercise ended. We had won. My team of first years had defeated 2 squads of senior cadets without taking a single simulated casualty. The training field was silent, save for the sound of the defeated warriors coughing and complaining loudly about the lingering sting in their noses. My cadets stared at me with a mixture of disbelief and awe. I had not used a single complex tactic. I had not outmaneuvered or outfought them. I had just been annoying. I had used a cooking spice and some garbage to defeat some of the most elite young warriors in the sector. I looked up at the observation tower. Aerie was staring down at me, her face unreadable. Then she turned and descended, her movements stiff with rage. She met me as I walked off the field. "That was not a battle," she hissed, her voice low and furious. "That was a disgrace. There was no honor in that victory." "Tell that to the cadets who are still standing," I said, gesturing to my wide-eyed team. "The goal of a defensive action is to survive. We survived. Mission accomplished." "You fought like a scavenger, not a soldier," she shot back. "War is a crucible that forges the spirit. It is the ultimate test of a warrior's lineage, her strength, her courage. It is about meeting your enemy face to face, with your honor intact." Her passion was almost startling. It was so deeply ingrained in her, a fundamental truth she had never thought to question. Her ancestors were probably great warriors, her family name etched on monuments and memorial walls. Honor was her inheritance. "Honor doesn't feed orphans." "Ari," I said quietly, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I have seen what your honorable crucibles do. I have walked through the aftermath. All the courage in the universe doesn't mean a thing to a ghost. Winning is what matters. Living is what matters. Going home is what matters." She flinched, as if I had struck her. Her eyes, burning with righteous fire a moment before, flickered with something else: confusion, hurt. We stood there for a long moment, the chasm between our 2 worlds stretching between us, vast and unbridgeable. The spicy air still stung my nose, a reminder of a victory that felt more like a sad, dirty trick. Nico, for her part, was thriving. The conservatory, for all its harsh discipline, was a stable environment. She had regular meals, a warm bed, and a routine. She started to open up, bit by bit. She never spoke about what had happened to her, where she came from. Instead, she focused on the here and now. She would watch the cadets train, her small tail wagging in imitation of their precise movements. She had become my shadow, my tiny, silent warden. One evening, I was sitting on the floor of our quarters, trying to reassemble a small mechanical device I had salvaged from the Wanderlust's wreckage. It was a complex task with one good hand. Nico sat beside me, watching my clumsy fingers with intense concentration. She reached out and, with surprising dexterity, used a small twig to push a tiny spring into place that I had been struggling with for 10 minutes. "Thanks, kid," I said, smiling. She looked up at me, her golden eyes serious. She pointed a small finger at the device, then at me. Then she mimed a rifle and made a soft pew-pew sound. She looked at me, her expression a clear question. "Are you a soldier?" I shook my head. "No, I'm just a pilot. I fix things." She seemed to consider this. Then she crawled into my lap, curled up, and rested her head against my chest. Her complete, unconditional trust was a heavy weight. I thought about the data core hidden in my room. I thought about the War Council and the cold, calculated slaughter at Emberfall. My hands curled into fists. The desire for vengeance was a bitter, familiar taste in the back of my throat. I wanted to find the people responsible and make them pay. I wanted to hurt them. Nico shifted in her sleep, her small hand gripping my shirt. I looked down at her. What would she think if she saw that darkness in me? What would happen to that fragile trust? I gently stroked her hair. "I will not kill anyone in front of you, Nico," I whispered. I did not know if she could hear me, or if she would understand. But it was a promise to her, and a promise to myself. I would find justice, not just revenge. It was a line I drew in the sand, a rule of engagement for a war I was only just beginning to understand. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this promise would make everything infinitely more difficult. My search for an ally led me, inevitably, to the scrap heap that was once my ship. Kale Oren had granted me access to the wreckage, ostensibly to salvage any non-sensitive personal effects. In reality, she wanted to see what I would take, what I valued. I found her in the engine room, or what was left of it. She was humming an old Earth rock anthem, her voice slightly off-key, as she skillfully detached a power converter from its scorched housing. She had dark, curly hair pulled back in a messy bun, grease smudges on her cheek, and the most intelligent, mischievous eyes I had seen since I arrived. Her uniform was a standard conservatory mechanic's jumpsuit, but the patch on her shoulder was from the interstellar exchange program. She was human. "Finders keepers," she said without looking up, her voice cheerful. "This converter is 3 generations ahead of anything they have in their workshops." "I think that technically makes it my property," I said. She finally looked up, and a wide, friendly grin spread across her face. "Adrian Hale, the legendary Dendad, the chili powder bombardier. I have heard so much about you, Tamsin Pike." She offered a greasy hand, and I shook it. "You are a long way from home." "Tell me about it," she laughed. "I am here on a 2-year engineering exchange. I get to study their advanced naval architecture, and they get to study, well, me, I guess. I think they are mostly fascinated by my complete lack of a tail." Tamsin was a breath of fresh, unfiltered air. She was clever, irreverent, and completely unimpressed by the rigid military culture of the Kitsune. Within an hour, she had agreed to help me. My story of needing to recover sensitive family data from the flight recorder was flimsy, but she saw the desperation in my eyes and, I think, was bored enough to welcome the challenge. We worked in her small, cluttered workshop, a chaotic paradise of tools, half-finished projects, and the faint smell of ozone and burnt sugar from an overworked nutritional paste synthesizer. "This is some serious encryption," she said a few nights later, her face illuminated by the glow of her console. She had jury-rigged a reader for my data core, military grade, but sloppy. They were in a hurry. "What can you tell?" I asked, leaning over her shoulder. Nico was asleep back in my quarters, under Ari's watchful eye. My partner had made it clear she considered my trips to the workshop a potential security breach. But she had not stopped me. "It is not just a battle plan," Tamsin murmured, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. "It is a template, a program. See this subroutine. It is a memory scrubber, high intensity, designed for deep psychological alteration. It does not just delete memories. It replaces them with a new, fabricated narrative. She pointed to a block of code. This part targets early life attachments, family bonds, childhood homes. It severs them. And this part, her finger traced another line. It implants a new loyalty matrix. Duty to the core. Absolute obedience to command. They are not just recruiting soldiers, they are building them from scratch. A cold dread trickled down my spine. The War Council. This was their signature. Can you trace where this program was sent? Who the recipients were? Not from this core, she said, shaking her head. The transmission logs are wiped, but the program itself, it has a watermark, a digital signature buried in the base code. She isolated the string of characters. It is not Kitsuna. It is not any known military signature. She frowned. Running a diagnostic. That is strange. The syntax, the architecture. It feels familiar. Almost human. The next major field exercise was a week later. It was a complex, multi-squad simulation of a planetary evacuation under fire. Aerie was given command of her elite unit, the Crescent Claw. I was, to her eternal disgust, assigned as her tactical advisor. My strategy is sound. Hail, she said in the pre-mission briefing, her voice tight. We stood over a holographic map of the simulated city. Squad Alpha will secure the perimeter of the spaceport. Squad Beta will provide overwatch. My unit will escort the civilian assets to the extraction point. It is a good plan, I admitted, but the opposing force knows it. It is what you are trained to do. They will expect a direct defense of the primary route. It is the most efficient route, she countered, and the most honorable. It is also a perfect kill box, I said, pointing to a narrow canyon on the map. They will let you get halfway through with the civilians and then ambush you from the ridges. You will be pinned down, and the civilians will be slaughtered. We will not fail, she insisted, her jaw set. You will not have a choice, I said. They are not going to fight you honorably. Ari, they are going to fight to win. She hated that I was right. I could see it in the tense line of her shoulders. But her pride, her deep-seated belief in the purity of her training, would not let her admit it. The simulation began. Things went exactly as I had predicted. The moment Ares' squad entered the canyon with the column of simulated civilians, represented by slow-moving drones, the ridges above them lit up with enemy fire. Alarms blared as the drones took simulated hits. Report Ares snapped into her comms. Heavy fire from the ridges. We are pinned down. Civilian assets taking losses. Ari's face was pale. This was not just a failure. It was a disgrace. Her perfect record was being shattered. We need to pull back, her second-in-command suggested. No, we do not retreat, Ari snarled. They are not targeting you, I said quietly, watching the tactical display. They are just farming the civilian drones. They win by causing the most non-combatant casualties. It is a psychological victory. What do you suggest, human? She asked, her voice dripping with scorn. Some kind of, spice-based trickery. Something like that. I said, open a channel to the opposing commander. Unencrypted. She stared at me, horrified. You want to what surrender? Negotiate, I corrected. This is not about honor. It is about saving the civilians. That is the primary objective of the mission, is it not? She hesitated, her pride warring with her duty. The alarm indicating another civilian loss blared. She closed her eyes. Open the channel. A moment later, the opposing commander's voice, belonging to a sharp-witted cadet named Lyra, came over the speaker. Sable fire. Come to beg for mercy. This is Adrian Hale, tactical advisor to Crescent Claw. I said, speaking clearly, I am offering you a deal, Commander. There was a pause. The human. This should be interesting. I am listening. Your objective is to inflict maximum civilian casualties. Our objective is to prevent them. I said, these objectives are mutually exclusive, and will result in a protracted, bloody engagement. I propose an alternative. There is a secondary evacuation route through the old service tunnels on the eastern side of the city. It is not on your tactical map. I will transmit the route to you. You will allow my civilian convoy to pass through the canyon unmolested. In return, you can take the tunnels and claim the strategic victory of capturing the spaceport. You win the field. We save the civilians. Everyone gets what they want. Silence. I could almost hear Lyra and her team debating the offer. It was a classic gambit. Give your opponent a golden bridge to retreat across. Let them have a victory they can brag about, in exchange for the victory you actually need. Why would you do that? Human Lyra asked, her voice suspicious. That is not how we fight. Maybe it is time you learned a new way. I said, you have 60 seconds to decide before we are forced to sacrifice the convoy to break through your lines. It was a complete bluff. We were hopelessly trapped. 30 seconds later, Lyra's voice came back. The deal is accepted. The tunnels for the convoy. Transmit the route. The firing from the ridges stopped. Ari watched in stunned silence as the enemy forces repositioned, heading for the spaceport. She gave the order, her voice a strained whisper, and the convoy of drones proceeded through the canyon and reached the extraction point. We had won. We had achieved the primary objective with 0 civilian losses. And Ari looked like she wanted to vomit. We stood before Kale Oren an hour later. The official report declared the mission a resounding success. An unprecedented outcome. Mr. Hale, the headmistress said, her voice as cold and flat as a sheet of ice. You achieved a perfect score in civilian preservation by surrendering the primary military objective. I achieved it by redefining victory. I corrected. The mission was to save the civilians, not to hold a useless piece of rock. A victory without glory is no victory at all, Ari stated, her voice shaking with suppressed fury. Kale Oren looked at her top cadet, and for the first time, I saw something other than cold pragmatism in her eyes. It was disappointment. Glory is a luxury, sable fire. Results are a necessity. You would do well to remember that. She turned her gaze back to me. Your performance has been illuminating. Mr. Hale, your unorthodox methods are a valuable data point. The compliment felt like a threat. To that end, she continued, I am upgrading your security detail. For your protection, of course, and for the child. The next morning, 2 small, sleek drones appeared outside our quarters. They were silent, hovering a few feet off the ground, their optical sensors glowing with a soft, blue light. They followed Nico and me everywhere, to the mess hall, to the workshop, to the training grounds. They were our new shadows, our constant, silent observers. Kale Oren was tightening the leash. Tamsin was not intimidated. If anything, the increased security only fueled her rebellious streak. She managed to find a blind spot in the drone's coverage, a small utility corridor behind her workshop. It was there that she showed me what she had found. I was tracing the power conduits for the main security grid, she whispered, her eyes bright with excitement. And I found this, a secondary system, completely off the official schematics. She led me to a heavy steel door, unmarked and seamlessly blended into the corridor wall. She bypassed the lock with a device of her own making. The door hissed open, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down. The air that wafted up was cold and sterile. At the bottom of the stairs was a small, climate-controlled room, and on shelves lining the walls were dozens, perhaps hundreds, of sleek, silver masks. They were featureless, covering the upper half of the face. Wires and fiber-optic cables coiled from the back of each one. What are they? I breathed. I think they are the memory scrubbers, Tamsin said, her voice low. The hardware. Memory masks. They are designed to interface directly with the neural pathways. This is not just a storage room. Adrian, this is an armory. She picked one up. They are used for the elite selection, A program for the most promising orphans. They are brought here. Their pasts are wiped clean, and they are turned into perfect soldiers, loyal only to the conservatory. My blood ran cold. It was real. It was all real. It was happening right here, under our feet. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place 2 nights later, in the suffocating silence of my quarters. Ari was on guard duty, sitting stiffly in a chair by the door, pretending to read a data slate. I was watching Nico sleep, the 2 surveillance drones hovering silently outside our window. Suddenly, Ari gasped. The slate fell from her hands, clattering on the floor. Her hands went to her temples, her face contorted in pain. "Ari," I said, getting to my feet. "Are you all right?" She did not seem to hear me. Her eyes were unfocused, staring at something far away. "The fire," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The smell of burning pine. A lullaby." My mother's voice. She shook her head violently, as if trying to clear it. The moment passed. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. The mask of the perfect soldier was gone, replaced by a raw, terrifying vulnerability. "It was nothing," she said. Her voice strained as she retrieved her slate. A sudden headache. But we both knew it was more than that. It was a crack in the wall, a flicker of a memory that was not supposed to exist. A life before the conservatory. Later, after she was sure Nico was sound asleep, she approached me. The drones outside cast long, shifting shadows into the room. "Hale," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The data core. The memory scrubber program you found. Could you use it to check someone?" I looked at her, at the proud, fierce warrior who was now so clearly terrified of her own mind. This was an act of profound desperation. To even ask me for this, she had to abandon every principle she held dear. "I could," I said slowly. "But if I do this, Ari, there is no going back. If you have been altered, your entire life, everything you believe in, could be a lie." "I have to know," she said, her fists clenched at her sides. "I have to know the truth." She looked at me, her golden eyes pleading. The unbreakable airy sable fire was breaking, and she was asking her enemy for help. "I will help you," I said. "But you have to understand something. Kale Oren is watching my every move. Tamsin's too. If we do this, we are declaring war on her, on this entire system." "I know," she breathed. She took a step closer, her gaze intense. "But I have one condition. Human." Her voice dropped, regaining some of its old, sharp edge. "I will help you uncover the truth. But this investigation of yours, this quest, if it brings dishonor to my class, to the cadets who have trained and bled and fought with their whole hearts, I will not hesitate. I will tear you apart myself." It was not a threat. It was a promise. The same way I had made a promise to Nico. We stood there in the dark, 2 enemies bound by a shared, dangerous secret. A fragile, volatile alliance had been forged in the shadows of the Kitsukami War Conservatory, and I had a feeling it was going to get us all killed. The operation was a violation. We did it in the dead of night, in the grease-scented sanctuary of Tamsin's workshop, with the surveillance drones temporarily blinded by a looped feed she had cleverly engineered. It felt like performing surgery on a soul with a wrench and a prayer. Ari sat on a stool, her back ramrod straight, her expression a mask of stoic resolve that did not quite hide the fear in her eyes. Tamsin moved with a quiet, professional intensity, attaching a series of delicate sensors to Ari's temples. "This is not a deep scan," Tamsin explained, her voice low. "I do not have the hardware for that. Think of it as reading the surface of the water. I am looking for disturbances, ripples, things that do not belong. I am cross-referencing the neural patterns with the memory scrubber program from your ship's data core." I stood by the workbench, My arms crossed, feeling utterly useless. I was a pilot. I could navigate an asteroid field in a solar storm, but the intricate landscape of the mind was a foreign, terrifying territory. Ari's tail was perfectly still, a rare sight. It was usually a barometer of her emotions, but now it was as rigid as iron, as if even it was holding its breath. "Ready?" Tamsin asked. Ari gave a short, sharp nod. Tamsin tapped a command into her console. A holographic display shimmered to life between us. A complex, three-dimensional web of light. It pulsed with a soft, golden rhythm. Ari's mind. It was beautiful, intricate, a galaxy of thought and memory. Tamsin's program overlaid a second, colder, blue-white grid onto the display, the template from the memory scrubber. For a long moment, the two patterns aligned almost perfectly. My heart sank. "It looks clean," I said, a wave of disappointment and, strangely, relief washing over me. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe it had just been a headache. "Wait," Tamsin whispered. Her eyes narrowed in concentration. She magnified a section of the display. "There." I leaned closer. In the otherwise harmonious flow of gold and blue, there were thin, jagged lines of crimson light. They were like hairline fractures in a perfect piece of glass, or stitches pulling together two pieces of fabric that did not quite match. "What are those?" Ari asked. Her voice strained. She could not see the display from her angle, but she could read the answer on our faces. "I would call them seams," Tamsin said. Her voice filled with a kind of clinical awe. "It is scar tissue. The scrubber program is not perfect. It cannot create a seamless new reality. It has to stitch the new memories over the old ones. These are the stitches. Your mind has been tailored. Ari, heavily." The color drained from Ari's face. She looked at her hands, turning them over as if they belonged to a stranger. "So the flashes, the pine trees, the voice. They are ghosts," I said quietly. "Echoes of the person you were before." She stood up, her movements jerky, unsteady. She walked to the far side of the workshop and stood with her back to us, her shoulders trembling. The perfect cadet, the pride of the conservatory, the warrior who believed in honor above all else, was built on a foundation of lies. Her entire identity, her sense of self, was a fabrication. "Did I have a family?" she asked the wall, her voice a raw, broken whisper. A real one. Neither of us had an answer for that. We walked back to our quarters in silence. The drones fell in behind us, their blue eyes a constant, emotionless reminder of our gilded cage. Ari did not say a word. She moved like an automaton, her eyes fixed on some distant, horrifying horizon only she could see. When we got back, Nico was asleep, her face peaceful in the soft lamplight. Ari stood over her for a long time, watching her breathe. Later, as I sat staring out at the manicured grounds of the conservatory, she came and stood beside me. "You hate this place, do you not?" she said. It was not a question. "I hate what it represents." I answered honestly. "I hate what it does to children. I was one of those children." "I know." She was quiet for a long time, the silence stretching between us, filled with the weight of her shattered world. "Why are you doing this?" "Hale," she finally asked. "This is not your fight. You could have just kept your head down, waited for a diplomatic exchange. Why risk everything for this? For me?" I thought about the Emberfall data core, hidden in a loose panel behind my cot. I thought about the ghosts of Cygnus X1, because I have seen where this road ends. I said, my voice low. I was there, at Emberfall. Her head snapped towards me, her eyes wide with shock. Emberfall was a name known throughout the fringe worlds, a byword for tragedy. I was a civilian freighter pilot, hauling terraforming equipment. I continued, the memories rising like bitter bile. I was grounded for repairs when the colonial authorities' munitions depot supposedly went up. But it was not an accident. I saw the ships in orbit, their markings scrubbed. I saw the surgical strikes that took out the communication relays first. It was a planned, methodical extermination. Ari. And the people who did it, the War Council. They are the ones who created the technology that was used on you. The raw anger, the thirst for vengeance that I had kept bottled up for years, began to surface. I could feel my hands clenching. For a long time, all I wanted was to find them and make them feel a fraction of the pain they caused. I wanted to burn their whole rotten system to the ground. I glanced over at Nico's sleeping form. But then, I fell out of the sky and a 6-year-old girl decided I was her personal safety blanket. And I made her a promise. I will not be the monster to fight the monsters. I will not use their tools. I am not looking for revenge anymore. I am looking for justice. I want to expose them, to drag them into the light so that everyone can see what they are. So they cannot do this to any more children. Not to Nico, and not to you. She listened. Her expression unreadable. She had built her life on the principles of glorious combat, of righteous fury unleashed on the battlefield. My path, the path of a patient, cunning saboteur who chose exposure over execution, was alien to her. But I saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. We were both survivors, in our own way, haunted by the same shadows. The night of the full moon fire dance arrived a week later. The entire conservatory gathered in the main ceremonial courtyard. The air was thick with the scent of burning cedar and the low, resonant hum of traditional chanting. Every student and instructor held a small, unlit paper lantern. At the center of the courtyard was a great, shallow brazier filled with glowing, white-hot coals. "What is this ceremony for?" I asked Ari, keeping my voice low. We stood on the sidelines with Nico, who watched the proceedings with wide, fascinated eyes. The surveillance drones hovered discreetly at a distance. "It is a ritual of purification," Ari explained, her voice distant. She was still processing the revelations of the scan, moving through her days with a brittle, fragile composure. It marks the transition of the first-year cadets from initiates to warriors. They will burn their false fur, a symbolic shedding of their past life, their civilian self, to be reborn in the fires of the conservatory. My blood ran cold. A symbolic shedding of their past life. It was a public, ritualized reinforcement of the memory scrubbing. The first-year cadets, their faces solemn, walked forward in a single file line. Each of them held a small tuft of white fur. One by one, they tossed it into the brazier. As the fur caught fire, it did not just burn. It flared up in a brilliant, intricate pattern of colored light, like a miniature firework. Greens, blues, and reds danced in the flames for a brief, beautiful moment before turning to ash. The crowd murmured in appreciation. "It is beautiful," Nico whispered, awestruck. But I was not looking at the beauty. I was a technician, a pilot. I looked at systems. And what I saw was not a random flare of color. It was a pattern, a code. The colors flashed in a specific, repeating sequence. It was too precise to be a natural chemical reaction. "Tamsin?" I sub-vocalized into the tiny comm unit she had given me, a device disguised as a button on my jacket. "Are you seeing this?" Loud and clear, her voice crackled in my ear. "I am running a spectral analysis of the light patterns. It is not just light. Adrian, it is data. There is a modulated heat signature in the flare. It is a thermographic broadcast. It hit me like a physical blow. The memory masks in the basement. They would not be activated by a simple radio signal. That would be too easy to detect, too easy to jam. But a localized line of sight, thermal broadcast, disguised as the central ritual of their culture, it was diabolical, and it was brilliant. The masks, I breathed. They are activated by the heat from the fire. That is my guess. Tamsin confirmed. The patterns are command codes. Reinforce loyalty subroutine. Suppress latent memory fragments. Solidify fabricated identity matrix. It is a system-wide software update, delivered as a religious ceremony. I looked at the faces of the young cadets, their eyes shining with devotion as they watched the flames. They were being shackled, their minds being overwritten, and they thought it was a sacred honor. My rage was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. The days that followed were a blur of tension. Ari grew more withdrawn, more volatile. She would spend hours staring at her reflection, as if trying to find the stranger who lived behind her eyes. My attempts to talk to her were met with a wall of silence or a burst of frustrated anger. But at night, when she thought I was asleep, I would see her watching Nico, her expression a heartbreaking mix of sorrow and a fierce, nascent protectiveness. Our strange, unspoken truce held. We were two broken pieces, slowly, cautiously beginning to fit together. One night, we were sharing the late watch, a duty that had become our designated time for quiet, unobserved conversation. We sat on a low wall overlooking the silent training grounds, the two moons of Kitsukami casting long, silver shadows. You know, for a primitive, you are not entirely useless. Hail, she said. The words almost a compliment. Your mind is strange. It does not move in straight lines. It is all angles and shortcuts. It is infuriating. That is the nicest thing you have ever said to me, I replied, smiling. It is not a compliment, she insisted. But there was no heat in her words. We are taught that strength is a direct application of force, that the shortest path is the honorable one. You seem to believe that the entire concept of a straight line is a personal insult. Where I come from, we call it efficiency, I said, and sometimes we call it survival. We are not the strongest species in the galaxy. We are not the fastest. We do not have claws or hyper-acute senses. So we have to be smarter. We have to be more stubborn. We have to be able to look at a system, find its flaws, and then break it. She looked at me, a new understanding in her eyes, a strength in weakness, or just a refusal to lose. I said, it is the one thing we are really, really good at. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the moons crawl across the sky. The air was cool, scented with pine from the surrounding forest. The anger and tension that had defined our relationship seemed to bleed away into the quiet darkness. Here, away from the prying eyes of the drones and the rigid structure of the conservatory, we were just two people. Do you think I will ever know who I was? She asked, her voice small. I do not know, I said honestly, but I know you get to choose who you are going to be. Right now, that is a freedom they can never take from you. She turned to face me. The moonlight caught in her fiery hair, and for the first time, I saw past the warrior, past the broken soldier, and saw the woman underneath, vulnerable, strong, beautiful. Before I knew what I was doing, I leaned in. She met me halfway. The kiss was gentle, hesitant. It was not a kiss of passion, but of shared loneliness, of a desperate, fragile connection in a world that had tried to break us both. It was a promise of something that might, in another life, have been simple. A loud thumping sound from our quarters shattered the moment. We sprang apart, our hearts pounding. The thumping came again, followed by a small, sleepy voice calling my name. Nico, we said in unison. I sighed, a wry smile touching my lips. My co-pilot has excellent timing. Ari actually laughed, a soft, surprising sound. Your den dad duties call. Hail. The moment was broken, but something had shifted between us. A wall had come down. We were no longer just allies of convenience. We were something more, something complicated, and something worth fighting for. Kale Oren shattered our fragile peace 2 days later. She summoned the entire student body to the main hall. Her face was grim, her posture radiating an iron authority. "Cadets," she announced, her voice echoing in the vast, silent hall. "In 2 weeks' time, we will be hosting the Grand Maneuvers, a full-scale, academy-wide war simulation. It will be the ultimate test of your training, your skill, and your loyalty." A murmur of excitement rippled through the assembled students. "This year is special," she continued, her eyes sweeping over the crowd. "We will be honored by the presence of distinguished guests, observers from the highest echelons of interspecies military command. Representatives from the War Council will be in attendance." My heart stopped. The War Council. Here. They were coming here. It was not a coincidence. This was an inspection, a graduation ceremony for their latest crop of custom-built soldiers. "The centerpiece of the maneuvers will be a complex live-fire exercise," Kyle said. "The lead element, the tip of the spear, will be the Crescent Claw unit, commanded by Cadet Airy Sablefire." Every head in the hall turned to Airy. It was the highest honor a cadet could receive. Airy stood frozen, her face a pale, emotionless mask. It was a death sentence. She was being showcased for her creators. And to provide a unique analytical perspective, Cale Oren added, her cold eyes finding me in the crowd. "Adrian Hale will be assigned as Cadet Sablefire's tethered tactical advisor. His every recommendation will be logged. His every movement will be monitored. He will be a vital part of the exercise." The cage had slammed shut. I was no longer an advisor. I was a specimen, pinned to a board for the War Council to observe. That night, the workshop was a hive of frantic energy. "They are coming," I said to Tamsin, pacing the small space like a caged animal. "We are out of time." "I know," she said, her eyes glued to her console. "I have been trying to trace the origin of the thermal broadcast from the fire dance. It is a closed system, but it has to have a central server, a command and control hub somewhere in the conservatory. And I found it," she said, her voice grim. She pointed to a schematic of the conservatory on her display. A single red light pulsed in the oldest, most central part of the complex. "It is here, deep in the sublevels, directly beneath the ancestral shrine." I stared at the screen, a cold dread washing over me. The ancestral shrine. It was the most sacred place on the entire planet. It was the heart of their culture, a place of deep reverence and tradition, where the spirits of their greatest warriors were said to reside. It was completely, utterly off-limits. "No one is allowed in there except the clan elders and the headmistress," Ari said, her voice hollow. She had been silent until now, standing in the corner of the workshop, a ghost at our War Council. To enter without permission. It is the gravest sacrilege imaginable. It is a defilement. Here was the final, impossible choice. The proof we needed. The server that controlled the memory masks and likely held every dark secret of the War Council's operations on this planet was located in the one place we could not go. To get it, we would have to commit an unforgivable act of cultural desecration. We would have to violate the very heart of Ari's heritage, the one thing she had left to cling to. "We have to go in," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "No," Ari said, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and despair. "I will not allow it. I will not be a party to the desecration of my ancestors. I would rather die with a lie in my head than live with that shame." "Ari, they are using your ancestors, your traditions, to hide their crimes," I argued, turning to face her. "They have twisted something beautiful and sacred into a weapon. The greatest honor you could pay your ancestors is to reclaim it, to cleanse it of this poison." "By spitting on their graves," she shot back, her eyes flashing with their old fire. "You are a human, Hale. You do not understand. You cannot understand what that place means to us." She was right. I did not understand. Not in the way she did. But I understood what was at stake. "You are right. I do not understand your faith," I said softly. "But I understand this. In that shrine is a machine that has stolen the lives of countless children. It stole your life. Ari, it is a cancer in the heart of your home. And if we do not cut it out, it will spread. The War Council will come. They will watch you perform in their little puppet show, and they will take the best and brightest of your generation and turn them into monsters, just like they did at Emberfall. Is that the legacy you want to leave for Nico's generation?" Her face crumpled. The mention of Nico was a physical blow. She looked away, her whole body trembling with the force of her internal conflict. I took a deep breath. I could not force her. This had to be her choice. "I have a plan," I said. "We do not go in like thieves in the night. We do not break down the doors. There is a ventilation shaft that Tamsin found on the old schematics. It leads to a maintenance conduit that runs directly alongside the server room. We can access the server through the conduit wall without ever setting foot in the shrine itself. No sacred ground will be touched. No rituals will be disturbed. We can copy the data, expose them, and be gone before anyone knows we were there. It will be clean, surgical." She stood there for a long, agonizing minute, torn between her past and her future, between her faith and the terrible, undeniable truth. I saw the warrior in her weighing the strategic value. I saw the broken woman in her weighing the cost. Finally, she looked up at me, her golden eyes clear and filled with a cold, hard resolve. "For Nico," she said, her voice a strained whisper. "And for the girl I used to be." She took a deep breath. "Tell me the plan, human." And it had better not fail. The air on the grand observation deck tasted of power. It was a sterile, filtered atmosphere, heavy with the scent of polished chrome and the quiet, collective ego of the assembled dignitaries. Below us, the vast training grounds of the Kitsukami War Conservatory spread out like a living map, a patchwork of simulated urban ruins, dense forest, and open plains. Thousands of cadets stood in perfect, silent formations, their colorful banners snapping in the manufactured breeze. It was a spectacle of precision and lethality, designed to impress. And it was working. The observers, a mix of high-ranking Kitsune clan lords and severe-looking representatives from various allied species, murmured their approval. But my eyes were on the small, isolated delegation seated near Kale Orin. They wore no uniforms, just simple, dark gray tunics. They watched the proceedings with a flat, analytical disinterest that was more terrifying than any overt display of aggression. The War Council. They looked less like soldiers and more like auditors, here to review a product they had commissioned. Ari stood beside me in the glass-fronted advisor's booth, her posture as rigid as the flagpoles below. She was a statue carved from compressed anxiety. Her crescent claw unit was at the center of the lead formation, the designated tip of the spear. In her ear, she wore a standard command link earpiece. I wore an identical one. They were our connection to Kale Orin's command center and, I suspected, our electronic leashes. "Are you ready?" I asked, my voice low. "No," she answered, her voice a strained whisper. "Are you?" I gave a grim smile. "I have a playlist all queued up." In my pocket, my fingers closed around a small, flat data wafer Tamsin had given me an hour before. It was a masterpiece of digital subterfuge. It was not a jammer. It was a Trojan horse. When Kale Orin sent the activation signal for the memory masks, a complex, encrypted burst of thermographic data, the comm system would route it through our advisor's node for logging purposes. My wafer, when slotted into the console in front of me, was programmed to intercept that specific signal packet. It would copy the packet's digital handshake and routing information, wrap it around a completely different payload, and send it on its way in less than a nanosecond. The payload Tamsin had chosen was, in her words, The most cognitively dissonant, non-threatening data file I could find. It was a 3-hour recording of a Terran lullaby, algorithmically scrambled and compressed into a useless burst of white noise. It would not erase the memory mask's programming, but it would hit them with a command so nonsensical, so fundamentally alien to their purpose, that it should, in theory, cause a system-wide logic fault. The masks would not get the order to make the cadets aggressive. They would get the equivalent of a dial-up modem trying to sing a nursery rhyme. All units, final check-in. Kale Oren's voice, cold and clear, echoed in our earpieces. Ari took a deep, shuddering breath and responded with flawless military cadence. Crescent claw, ready and waiting. I leaned forward, my movements casual, and slid the wafer into a diagnostic port on the console. A tiny green light, visible only from my angle, winked on. The trap was set. Commence grand maneuvers, Kale Oren commanded. Objective for lead elements: pacify the designated sector. All necessary forces authorized. Civilian assets are acceptable losses. There it was. The brutal, coded language. Acceptable losses. On the field, hundreds of slow-moving drones, representing a civilian population, began to trundle along the simulated city streets. Then came the signal. A wave of energy I could not see or feel washed over the field. On Kyle Oren's main display, a small icon flashed, indicating that the Tactical Enhancement Program had been broadcast. In my ear, I heard the faintest, almost subliminal click as our node processed and forwarded the signal. My heart hammered against my ribs. Had it worked? I watched the Crescent Claw unit. According to the Emberfall protocols, this was the moment they should have transformed. Their tactics should have become brutally efficient, their movements devoid of hesitation. They should have been a wave of destruction. Instead, they just advanced. They moved with their usual disciplined grace, taking up defensive positions, their formations precise and cautious. They were acting like soldiers, not berserkers. Crescent Claw. What is your status? Kale's voice cut through the comms, a sharp edge of impatience in her tone. You have a direct path to the sector's command node. Why are you establishing a defensive perimeter? Ari hesitated for a fraction of a second. Headmistress, our path is blocked by civilian assets. We are maneuvering to bypass them without incident. A tense silence followed. Kale Oren had given them a command to kill, and her top cadet was talking about traffic control. Your orders are to pacify the sector. Sable fire, Kale snapped. The civilian assets are an obstruction. Remove them. This was the moment of truth. The Aerie of 2 weeks ago would have obeyed without question. But the woman standing on that field was different. Her entire world had been cracked open, and she was looking at her orders through the fissures. I could almost feel her inner turmoil, the war between a lifetime of conditioning and a few weeks of terrible truth. Headmistress, Ari's voice came back, clear and steady, laced with a new, unfamiliar steel. My objective is to secure the sector. Firing on unarmed civilian targets would create chaos and bog us down in a non-strategic engagement. It is an inefficient use of resources. We are proceeding with the bypass maneuver. She was using Kale's own language, the cold logic of the pragmatist, against her. She was not disobeying the order. She was questioning its tactical validity. It was a brilliant, defiant move. In the command center, Kale Oren's face was a mask of cold fury. She knew. She did not know how, but she knew her system had failed. Her eyes, magnified on the main view screen, swiveled from the tactical map and seemed to stare directly at me through the reinforced glass of my advisor's booth. Security, she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. Detain the human advisor. Now. He has compromised this exercise. The door to my booth hissed open. 2 heavily armed conservatory guards stepped in, their faces grim. Adrian Hale, one of them said, you are to come with us. I gave them my most charming, disarming smile. Is there a problem? Officers, I was just enjoying the show. The catering on this deck is a little sparse, but the view is fantastic. I had been planning for this. While they were focused on me, my good hand was already under the console, pulling a small, pre-packaged bundle from the magnetic clamps where I had placed it earlier. I tossed it onto the floor behind them. It was a simple device, a pressurized can of chili oil connected to a timed release valve. The can hissed, releasing a fine, aerosolized cloud of pure capsaicin. The effect in the enclosed booth was immediate. The two guards, with their hypersensitive kitsune noses, doubled over, choking and gasping. Their eyes streamed. My own eyes were burning, but I had come prepared. My nasal passages coated with a thick, numbing gel Tamsin had provided. So sorry about that. I wheezed, backing out the door. Hazard of being a primitive. We have terrible allergies. I slammed the door shut, locking them in their own personal spicy hell, and ran. My objective was not to escape. That was impossible. My objective was to create a diversion, to draw as much attention as possible, for as long as possible, to buy Tamsin time. Meanwhile, 50 feet below the ground, in a cramped, dusty ventilation shaft, Tamsin Pike was crawling on her belly. The only light came from a small lamp mounted on her forehead, its beam cutting a small, lonely circle in the oppressive darkness. The air was stale, thick with the smell of old metal and ozone. The distant, rhythmic hum of the conservatory's power grid was a constant, low thrum against her ears. She reached the designated junction and peered through the grate. Below her, she could see the faint, pulsing blue light of the hidden server room. It was exactly where the schematics said it would be. She unslung the toolkit from her back. Her part of the plan was, on paper, simple: cut through the conduit wall, attach a data probe to the server's maintenance port, and copy everything. Her plasma cutter made a low hiss as it sliced through the metal of the conduit, the smell of burnt durasteel filling the small space. She worked with a focused, unhurried precision, her mind a calm island in a sea of adrenaline. She was a builder, a maker. This act of careful, deliberate deconstruction was a violation of her very nature, but a necessary one. She finally peeled back a section of the wall, revealing a thick bundle of fiber optic cables. She found the maintenance port and carefully attached her probe. Her data slate lit up, lines of code scrolling across the screen. "I am in," she whispered into her comm, her voice barely audible over the hum of the server fans. "Beginning the data transfer now. This is huge. Adrian, it is everything. Personnel files, psychological profiles, mission logs." Her breath caught. "I have found the Emberfall directory. It is all here. The original orders, the casualty reports, everything." She initiated the full system copy. A progress bar appeared on her screen. It was moving with agonizing slowness. "This is going to take a while," she said. "The files are massive." As the main data cache was copying, she tried to access the core command files, the deep programming of the memory scrubber system itself. A new window popped up on her screen. "Access denied, biometric authentication required." "Damn it," she muttered. "There is another layer of security. A genetic lock." She ran a quick diagnostic. "It is keyed to a specific bloodline, a high-ranking kitsune lineage. Without a genetic sample, the deepest files will remain encrypted." On the field, Ari was facing her own crisis. Kale Oren, realizing her control over the Crescent Claw was gone, had changed tactics. She was now broadcasting Ari's insubordination to the other squad leaders, painting her as a traitor who was jeopardizing the entire exercise. "Cadet Sablefire has been compromised by the alien," Kale's voice announced over the command channels. "Her judgment is impaired. All units are to disregard her and follow their original directives." Some of the squads hesitated, but years of conditioning were hard to overcome. A few units began to advance on the civilian drones, their training rifles raised. Ari saw this. Her squad was intact. Her mind was clear. But she was about to lose the battle for the hearts and minds of her fellow cadets. She had to make a stand, not just with her actions, but with her words. She opened a direct channel to Kale Oren, patching it through the all-squad frequency. Headmistress Oren, her voice rang out across the battlefield. Sharp and clear. You speak of compromise. Let us speak of truth. You taught us that honor is the soul of a warrior. Is there honor in firing on the unarmed? Is there honor in a victory that is built on a mountain of innocent dead? In the command center, Kale's face was like stone. The human has made you weak. Sablefire. You have forgotten what it means to be strong. No. Ares' voice, filled with a power and certainty that sent a shiver down my spine, echoed from every speaker on the field. You are the one who has forgotten. You taught me that strength was about never retreating, never surrendering. But you were wrong. Choosing to protect a life that cannot protect itself is not weakness. It is the only strength that matters. My own situation was becoming progressively less philosophical. I was leading a squad of very determined, very angry security guards on a merry chase through the stadium's utility corridors. My chili bomb had bought me a few minutes, but they were catching up. I skidded around a corner, my path blocked by 2 more guards. I was trapped. I fell back on the oldest trick in the book misdirection. I threw a handful of spare nuts and bolts I had in my pocket against a far metal wall. The guards flinched at the clatter, their heads swiveling towards the sound. It was the moment of hesitation I needed. I ducked into a side passage just as they opened fire, light beams searing the air where I had been standing. But my luck was running out. The corridor was a dead end. I was cornered. I could hear them coming, their boots pounding on the metal floor. Just as they rounded the corner, a new sound filled the corridor, a high-pitched, chittering war cry. A small, furry body shot out of a low-maintenance hatch and latched onto the leg of the lead guard. It was Nico. And she was not alone. Behind her came a half-dozen other small children, the other orphans and young dependents who lived in the conservatory. They swarmed the guards, their faces painted with streaks of mud, brandishing sticks like swords. They were not attacking. They were playing. Mouse hunt, one of the little boys yelled gleefully. The big grumpies are the mice. It was a traditional Kitsune children's game. The security guards, trained for lethal combat, had no idea what to do. They could not fire on the children. They tried to gently disengage, but the kids were like a swarm of hyperactive bees. They giggled and shrieked, tripping the guards with expertly placed rolling maneuvers, grabbing at their tails, and generally causing absolute, adorable chaos. The deadly serious tactical pursuit had degenerated into a farcical, impromptu daycare session. I stared, dumbfounded. Nico, seeing me, let go of the guard's leg and ran to me, a triumphant grin on her face. Dendad is safe, she declared. It was the most beautiful, most ridiculous rescue I had ever seen. The tension of the moment shattered, replaced by a wave of pure, hysterical relief. The chaos in the corridors was mirrored by the chaos on the field. Ari's speech had struck a chord. The cadets were not mindless drones. They were young women who had been taught to value honor and courage. Kale's cold, brutal orders were now in direct opposition to those core values. They were confused. They were wavering. Ari saw her moment. This was it, the point of no return. She took a deep breath, raised her rifle high, and gave a new command, her voice ringing with the absolute authority of a true leader. All Crescent Claw units, hear me, she cried. Our orders are changed. Our new primary objective is the protection of all civilian assets. We will form a defensive cordon around them. We will hold the line. Any unit that fires on the civilians will be considered a hostile force. This is my final word. She had done it. She had openly defied the headmistress in front of the War Council and the entire conservatory. She had drawn a line in the sand, not with blood, but with courage. Her squad immediately moved to obey, forming a protective circle around the helpless drones. On the other side of the field, another squad leader, Lyra, the same one I had negotiated with before, watched for a long moment. Then, she lowered her rifle. "Golden Sun Squad," she said over her comm, her voice quiet but firm. "You heard her. Stand down. We are with the Crescent Claw." A ripple of dissent was turning into a wave of rebellion. The perfect, disciplined machine of the Kitsukami War Conservatory was beginning to break apart. And I stood in a utility corridor, surrounded by laughing children, watching the whole beautiful, chaotic mess unfold. Climax A was over, and we had survived. The grand maneuvers had ground to a halt. On the field below, a silent, tense standoff was in progress. Ari's Crescent Claw and their newfound allies had formed a protective ring around the civilian drones, a defiant island in a sea of confused, wavering cadets. In the grandstand, Kale Oren's face was a thundercloud, her authority shattered. The War Council observers watched with an unnerving, reptilian stillness, their faces betraying nothing. And I stood in a utility corridor, surrounded by a giggling band of tiny, pint-sized liberators who had just neutralized two heavily armed guards with the strategic application of playground games. The moment was a powder keg, waiting for a spark. "Adrian, are you there?" Tamsin's voice, tight with adrenaline, crackled in my ear. "I have everything. I am patching into the main hall's broadcast system now. Get ready for the fireworks." As if on cue, the colossal view screen in the Grand Hall, which had been showing a tactical overview of the frozen battlefield, flickered. It went dark for a single, heart-stopping second, and then it blazed to life with new information. It was not a tactical map. It was a wall of cold, black text on a stark white background. A confused murmur rippled through the assembled dignitaries and cadets. Kale Oren stiffened, her eyes widening in dawning horror. The document was titled Operation Emberfall Final Action Directive. Tamsin was not just showing them data. She was telling a story. She highlighted key phrases, blowing them up on the screen for all to see. Phase 3. Initiate Psychological Deterrence Protocol. Target parameter, maximum civilian casualties, to establish precedent of unquestioned authority. Acceptable losses 95% of non-combatant population. The murmur in the hall died, replaced by a vast, horrified silence. The cadets on the field, watching on their wrist-mounted displays, froze. They were reading, in the dispassionate, bureaucratic language of war, a detailed instruction manual for a massacre. It was the antithesis of every lesson on honor and glory they had ever been taught. Then, Tamsin highlighted the final authorization line at the bottom of the document. A long, complex string of alphanumeric code pulsed on the screen. It was the digital signature of the commanding authority. "Running signature analysis," Tamsin's voice announced. "Broadcast now through the hall's powerful speaker system." The audio was tinny, distorted by the comlink, but her words were clear. "Signature does not match Kitsukami War Conservatory command codes. Cross-referencing with interspecies intelligence archives. Match found." Two words appeared on the screen in blood-red letters: War Council. A collective gasp swept through the hall. The clan lords, the allied observers. They all stared at the small, gray-clad delegation. The members of the War Council did not so much as flinch. They simply continued to watch, their expressions as blank as polished stone. "The main data cache is almost copied." Tamsin's voice continued, a new urgency in her tone. "But the core files, the source code for the memory scrubber, it is protected by a secondary lock, a biometric seal. I cannot bypass it. It requires a genetic key from a high bloodline kitsune." In the command center, Kale Oren saw a sliver of hope. The final, most damning proof was still secure. On the field, Ari stood listening, Her face pale. A genetic key. A high bloodline. It was a lock she had no way of opening. But Tamsin was not finished. A new image filled the screen, a complex, circular pattern of glowing kitsune script. "This is the lock," she announced. "I am creating a remote interface through the conservatory's network. If any recognized high bloodline clan leader on the observation deck wishes to unlock the truth, they need only place their hand on the nearest command console." It was a challenge, a public gauntlet thrown down in front of the entire kitsune aristocracy. The clan lords exchanged uneasy glances. To interfere would be to involve themselves in Kale Oren's treason. To refuse would be to sanction a cover-up. They were frozen by political caution. Ari looked at the screen, at the glowing, impossible lock, and in that moment, something shifted within her. It was not a decision based on logic or strategy. It was an act of pure, desperate faith in the ghosts that haunted her own mind. The smell of burning pine. A half-remembered lullaby. She turned to the nearest field command terminal. A simple metal lectern used to relay orders. It was connected to the same network Tamsin was using. "Ari, what are you doing?" her second-in-command whispered, her eyes wide with alarm. "I am knocking on a door," Ari said, her voice quiet. She reached out and placed her hand flat on the surface of the terminal. For a moment, nothing happened. The glowing lock on the giant screen remained unchanged. Kale Oren almost allowed herself a smile. And then, the screen flashed. The intricate script of the lock pulsed with a brilliant, golden light. A single line of text appeared beneath it. "Biometric key accepted. Welcome, Ariana Sablefire, daughter of General Caden Sablefire, clan chief of the Northern Fires." The hall erupted. Ari stumbled back from the terminal as if it had burned her. Her name, her full name, her father's name, a name she had never known, a name that carried the weight of a legendary, lost hero. General Caden Sablefire had been a celebrated war chief who had vanished without a trace 2 decades ago, presumed killed in a border skirmish. The unlocked files flooded the screen, cascading in a waterfall of undeniable truth. Personnel files, medical logs, and a single, horrifying entry. Subject Ariana Sablefire. Age 6. Status orphaned. Recommendation. Prime candidate for elite selection program. Procedure. Full memory. Wipe and narrative. Reconstruction. Objective forge. Subject into a symbol of the conservatory's strength. Unburdened by past allegiances. Authorized by Headmistress Kale Oren. The truth was laid bare for all to see. Ari was not just an orphan recruited into the conservatory. She was the heir to a powerful clan, her identity stolen, her mind rewritten, her entire life a carefully constructed lie designed to turn her into the perfect weapon, a living icon for a war she was never meant to question. All eyes turned to Kale Oren. The headmistress stood tall, her face pale, but her expression unyielding. The fury and shock of the crowd washed over her, but she did not bend. "It is true," she said, her voice cutting through the uproar with icy precision. "I did it. I made a difficult choice for the future of our people. General Sablefire was a relic. He believed in outdated notions of mercy, of restraint. He would have led us to ruin. His daughter, molded correctly, could lead us to glory." Glory Ari's voice, broadcast from the field, was filled with a terrible, quiet rage. "You call this glory? You stole my father. You stole my life. You turned me into a cage for a ghost." "I gave you purpose," Kale shot back. "I gave you strength. I forged you into the greatest warrior of your generation." There was another way. A new voice said, "My voice." The security guards who were supposed to be detaining me were still being swarmed by laughing children. I walked calmly out of the corridor and into the grand hall, Nico's small hand gripping mine. I walked to the main dais, and all the anger, all the fire of my quest for vengeance, had cooled into a single, clear purpose. I tapped the command console, and a new image replaced the damning files on the screen. It was a map of the training grounds, the same one from the wargame, but overlaid on it was a complex network of blue lines. "This is the evacuation plan I designed before the grand maneuvers began," I said, my voice calm and clear. "It uses the city's sewer systems, service tunnels, and structural weaknesses. A route that would have allowed for the complete evacuation of all civilian assets with zero casualties, while the main military force engaged the enemy in a strategic delaying action. It proves that you can be strong and merciful at the same time. It proves that you can win without slaughtering the innocent. You did not make a hard choice, Headmistress. You made the easy one. You chose cruelty because you lacked the imagination for anything else." Kale Oren stared at the map, at the elegant, undeniable logic of it. She had been beaten, not with force, but with a better idea. Her entire philosophy, her life's work, was exposed as a crude, brutal, and ultimately, unnecessary lie. I saw the light of fanaticism in her eyes shift into the cold fire of desperation. She had lost, but she could still deny us the ultimate victory. "If my legacy is to be ashes," she snarled, "then I shall light the fire myself." Her hand darted to a hidden panel on her command chair. On the main screen, a new window appeared, a schematic of the ancestral shrine. A red light pulsed in the server room. "Self-destruct sequence initiated. Detonation in 60 seconds. A plasma charge in the server room. A cleansing fire to destroy all the evidence." Panic erupted. The dignitaries scrambled back. The guards did not know who to obey. "Tamsin, can you stop it?" I yelled into my comm. "No way," her voice came back, strained with panic. "It is a hardwired command. I am locked out." The countdown began on the screen. 55, 54. I looked at the schematic, my mind racing, searching for any solution, any flaw in the system. But it was a closed loop, a final, spiteful act of destruction. Nico, startled by the shouting, had been clutching a small, carved wooden charm I had seen the other children playing with. It was a traditional toy, a circle with intricate carvings of cedar leaves. During my frantic research into Kitsune culture, I had seen that symbol before, a ward of cessation, a token used in religious ceremonies to signify a peaceful end to a ritual. In her fear, she stumbled against the main dais. The hand holding the charm bumped against a small, glowing optical sensor on the console, the same one that had read Ari's handprint. The countdown on the screen stopped at 48 seconds. A new line of text appeared in calm, green script. "Cessation. Ward detected. Sacred rite concluded. Destruct sequence aborted. Have a peaceful day." The entire hall stared in stunned silence. A multi-million credit military self-destruct sequence, designed to be unstoppable, had just been canceled out by a child's toy because the system's programmers had, in a fit of cultural reverence, built in a protocol to respect ancient religious symbols. It was the most absurd, most beautiful system flaw I had ever seen. The spell was broken. The cadets on the field, the instructors in the hall, their loyalty to Kale Oren, already fractured, now completely shattered. They were looking for a new leader. They were looking at Ari. Ari strode onto the dais. She was no longer the conflicted cadet. She was no longer the ghost in the machine. She was Ariana Sablefire, daughter of a general. And her voice rang with an authority that was born not of programming, but of truth. "By the sacred law of the First Den," she declared, her voice resonating with an ancient power she did not know she possessed. "By the right of my blood, I command this violence to cease. The grand maneuvers are over. I call for a full cessation of all conservatory activities, pending a council of the clans." Ancestral law. It was the one thing that superseded even the headmistress's authority. The appearance of a legitimate heir of a lost clan chief, invoking the sacred laws, was a political earthquake. The instructors, the guards, they all lowered their weapons. They bowed their heads, not to the disgraced Kale Oren, but to Ari. In the quiet that followed, I stepped forward. I could not give them orders. I was not one of them, but I could give them a tool. "You have a choice to make," I said, my voice echoing in the silent hall. "You can tear this place down, or you can rebuild it into something better, something worthy of your honor." I brought up a simple text file on the screen. It was titled The Den Code. "Your culture is built around the idea of the den, a place of safety, a place for family. The ultimate duty of a warrior is not to seek glory, but to protect the den. This is a new code of conduct, built on that single, simple truth." The screen listed the core tenets. 1. The den is sacred. All non-combatants, all homes, all places of shelter are to be protected above all else. 2. Protect the young. A warrior who brings harm to a child has forfeited all honor. 3. Strength is measured not by the blows you land, but by the blows you prevent. A true victory is one where all dens remain safe. It was humane warfare, translated into their cultural language. It was not a human idea I was forcing on them. It was their own highest ideal, reflected back at them. The immediate aftermath was a blur. A hasty council was convened on the observation deck. The disgraced members of the War Council were detained by the other interspecies delegations. Their diplomatic immunity instantly revoked. Kyle Oren, her face a mask of cold, defiant hatred, was taken into custody by the Kitsune clan lords. She did not resist, but her final words to the council were a chilling promise. "I demand a full, public trial," she said. Her eyes locked on Eri. "Let the entire world hear my reasons. Let them decide what true strength is." She was not surrendering. She was turning her trial into one last battlefield. The clan elders, their faces grim, formally recognized Eri's claim to her father's title and appointed her the interim head of a new provisional council to oversee the conservatory. She stood before them, a young woman bearing a weight that would have crushed most people. But she did not flinch. She accepted. I stood by the window, watching the cadets milling on the field below, their disciplined formations broken, talking amongst themselves, trying to piece together their shattered world. Nico was asleep on a nearby chair, her small chest rising and falling peacefully, the little wooden charm still clutched in her hand. Ari came and stood beside me. "It is done," she said, her voice weary. "No," I said, looking at her. "It is just beginning, for you." She nodded, accepting the truth of it. "What will you do now, Adrian?" she asked, her golden eyes searching my face. "You are a free man. You can go home." Go home. The words sounded strange. For the first time in 20 years, I had found a fight that mattered more than my own desire for peace. I had found a reason to stand my ground. But was it my place to stay? I was an outsider, a human. My presence here could be seen as a form of interference, a contamination of their culture as they tried to heal. I had given them the tools, but they had to be the ones to rebuild. The choice hung in the air between us, as vast and as silent as the space between stars. Stay and help, and risk becoming the thing I fought against, or leave, and trust that the seeds I had planted would be enough. The revolution, as it turned out, was quiet. It did not come with explosions or grand pronouncements, but with the scratching of pens on data pads and the low, earnest murmur of voices in committee rooms. The Kitsukami War Conservatory did not fall. It simply began to change, like a great slow river changing its course. The Provisional Council, a hastily assembled but surprisingly effective body of clan elders and senior instructors, now governed the academy. And, at its head, a reluctant but resolute leader, was Ariana Sablefire, clan chief of the Northern Fires. She wore her new title like a heavy, unfamiliar cloak, but she did not buckle under its weight. The first official act of the council was the unanimous adoption of the Den Code as a core tenet of the conservatory's new charter. The words I had written in a fit of desperate hope were now being etched into the very foundations of their institution. It was a strange, humbling feeling, like watching a stray seed you had dropped by accident grow into a towering tree. My own status had shifted from prisoner to honored guest to, most uncomfortably, a kind of living legend. The younger cadets would fall silent when I entered a room, their ears twitching with a mixture of awe and curiosity. I was the human, the den dad, the chili powder trickster. I was a myth in the making, and it was the most compelling reason I had to leave. A myth is a statue. It cannot help. It cannot advise. It can only stand there and be stared at. The Kitsune needed a leader, not an idol. They had Ari for that. The work on the Wanderlust had progressed with astonishing speed, thanks to Tamsin and a crew of now devoted engineering cadets who saw her as some kind of low-tech sorceress. The ship, once a monument to my failed retirement, was becoming spaceworthy again. It was time to go. I found Nico sitting on the floor of our quarters, carefully weaving a cord of dried cedar bark. She had been quiet and withdrawn ever since she heard I was leaving. I sat down on the floor across from her, my heart a dull, heavy ache in my chest. This was the part I had been dreading. "Hey, kid," I said softly. She did not look up, her small fingers continuing their intricate work. "You are going away," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," I said, "I am." Why, the word was small, a tiny pinprick of hurt. How do you explain geopolitics and the delicate ethics of cultural non-interference to a 6-year-old? Because this is your den, Nico, and it needs its own people to look after it now. Ari is here. She will keep you safe. "You are my den dad," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Den dads are supposed to stay." The simple, unassailable logic of it was a knife in my gut. I had stumbled into this role by accident, a cosmic joke that had become the most serious responsibility of my life. And now I was walking away from it. "Sometimes," I said, my own voice thick, "den dads have to go on long trips. To make sure other dens are safe, too." It was a clumsy lie, but it was the best I could do. She finally looked up at me, her huge golden eyes shimmering with unshed tears. She held out the thing she had been making. It was a small, woven medallion of cedar bark, with a smooth, gray river stone tied in the center. It looked simple, but I could see the hours of careful work in its tight, even weave. "For your den," she whispered, pressing it into my good hand. "So you do not get lost." A den charm, a symbol of family, of belonging, of a home I had not even realized I had found. I closed my fingers around the small, warm object. "I will not get lost," I promised, my voice cracking. "Thank you, Nico." She launched herself at me then, her small arms wrapping around my neck, her face buried in my shoulder. She did not cry loudly, but I could feel the silent, racking sobs of a child who was losing the one piece of stability she had found in a terrifying world. I held her tight, the cedar charm digging into my palm, and I wished, with an intensity that staggered me, that I was a better man, a man who could stay. Tamsin found me in the Wanderlust's cockpit, running a final diagnostic on the navigation system. The den charm hung from a small hook above the main view screen, a rustic, handmade ornament in a room of cold, hard technology. "So," she said, leaning against the doorframe, a greasy rag in her hand, "the most famous den dad in the entire sector is finally flying the coop." I managed a weak smile, just trying to avoid the paparazzi. "I hear they are ruthless." "They are," she agreed, her expression softening. "It is the right thing to do, you know. Leaving. Tell that to my conscience, I muttered, looking at the charm. Hey, she said, walking over and putting a comforting hand on my shoulder. You did the impossible, Adrian. You walked into the heart of a broken system, armed with nothing but stubbornness and a few cooking spices, and you helped them fix themselves. You gave them a choice. Now they have to be the ones to live with it. That is not your job. It feels like I am abandoning them. You are trusting them, she corrected gently. There is a difference. Besides, she added, her usual mischievous grin returning, if you stick around, you will have to start paying taxes. And I have seen their tax code. It is brutal. I laughed, the sound a welcome relief. Thanks, Tamsin, for everything. Are you kidding? She said, wiping a smudge of grease from her cheek, leaving a new one in its place. This has been the most fun I have had in years. They gave me a new power converter and full access to their engine schematics. I am the one who should be thanking you. She gave my shoulder a final squeeze. Fly safe, Adrian, and try not to get adopted by any more orphans. You might not be so lucky next time. I was thinking of charging for my services. I joked, Dendad for hire, reasonable hourly rates, bulk discounts available for especially traumatized star systems. She laughed, a bright, genuine sound that echoed in the quiet cockpit. Send me your business card. My last meeting was with Ari. She was no longer just Ari Sablefire, cadet. She was Lady Sablefire, interim chancellor, a title that sounded both absurd and perfectly natural. She was standing in the cedar forest that bordered the conservatory, the place where we had shared our first hesitant kiss. The setting sun filtered through the tall trees, striping the ground with long shadows. The air was cool and clean. She was not wearing a uniform, but a simple, practical tunic and trousers. She looked younger, and at the same time, infinitely older. The weight of her new responsibilities had settled on her, but it had not crushed her. It had given her a new kind of gravity. The ship is ready, she asked, her voice quiet. Ready as it will ever be, I said. We stood in an awkward silence for a long moment, the unspoken words a tangible presence between us. I cannot ask you to stay, she said finally, her eyes fixed on the distant, snow-capped mountains. It would not be right. This is our mess to clean up. We have to prove that we can do it ourselves. I know, I said, and you will. You are the leader they need. Ari. I am a soldier who was taught to follow orders her entire life, she countered, a flicker of her old insecurity showing. Now, I have to be the one to give them. I am not sure I know how. Yes, you do. I said, you already have. On the training field. You chose to protect lives instead of taking them. That is the only lesson a leader ever needs to learn. She finally turned to look at me, and I saw the conflict in her eyes, the duty she had accepted, and the future she was sacrificing for it. But I will still need guidance. Your perspective. It is different. It helps me see the corners I am trained to ignore. She took a deep breath. I want you to write it all down, Adrian. Your tactics, your ideas. The Den Code is a philosophy, but I need a curriculum, a new way to teach our cadets, a textbook on how to be a warrior who builds, not just one who breaks. Will you do that for me? Send it from wherever you go. It was a bridge, a way for us to remain connected, to continue our strange partnership across the light years, a way for her to ask for my help without compromising her own authority. I will, I said. It will be the first and only book I have ever written. Thank you, she whispered. Before I left, there was one last thing I had to do. The security wing of the conservatory was a place I had hoped never to see again. Cale Oren was being held in a comfortable, but inescapable, detention cell, awaiting her public trial. The guards let me in without a word. She was sitting on a simple cot, staring at the blank wall opposite her. She looked smaller, diminished without her uniform and the trappings of her office, but her back was still ramrod straight. The iron had not left her spine. "Have you come to gloat, human?" she asked, her voice flat, without looking at me. "No," I said, stopping a few feet from the transparent barrier of the cell. "I came to understand." She finally turned her head, her cold eyes fixing on me. "You would not understand. You speak of mercy, of compassion. They are luxuries. When your entire species is on the brink of extinction, when you are surrounded by predators, you do not have the luxury of mercy. You can only be hard. You can only be strong." "And what did that strength get you, Kale?" I asked quietly. "You had the most disciplined, most lethal fighting force in this sector. And you lost. You lost to a tired, broken pilot with a sack of chili powder, a handful of children's games, and a better idea." Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Just then, a small figure darted past the guards in the hallway and stopped at the entrance to the detention area, peering in with wide, curious eyes. It was Nico. She must have followed me. Kale Oren's gaze shifted to her. She watched the small, orphaned girl, the living embodiment of the collateral damage her philosophy had always deemed acceptable. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a crack in the iron. It was not remorse. Not yet. It was something more complex. It was the quiet, devastating recognition of a future she had no part in. "You know," I said softly, my eyes on Nico. "I used to think strength was about never falling down. But maybe it is not. Maybe real strength is about knowing how to lose, at the right time, in the right way, so that the people who come after you have a chance to win something better." I left her with that thought, with the image of the child she would have sacrificed staring at her from the hallway. I did not know if the seed would ever take root in that hard, bitter soil, but I had planted it. That was all I could do. The moons were high in the sky when Ari and I stood under the cedar trees again. The forest was filled with light. In the wake of the grand maneuvers, the cadets, on their own initiative, had begun a new tradition. They had hung hundreds of paper lanterns from the branches of the trees, each one containing a small, flameless light. It was a silent, beautiful protest against the dark fires of the past. "If you ever come back," Ari said, her voice a soft murmur in the quiet, "this den will have a place for you." I smiled, "As long as there is coffee." She laughed, the sound like a small, clear bell in the cool night air. And then she was in my arms, and her lips were on mine. It was not like the first time. This kiss was not hesitant. It was a kiss of profound and painful certainty. A goodbye. It was the taste of a future we both knew we could not have. When we broke apart, there were tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. "Be safe, Adrian Hale." "You too, Ariana Sablefire," I said, speaking her true name for the first time. It felt right. A new monument stood on the main parade ground. The great brazier that had been used for the fire dance had been removed. In its place was a tall, intricate sculpture of wrought iron, shaped like a cage of fire. But the cage was empty. The fire was gone. It was not a symbol of destruction anymore. It was a hearth, waiting for a flame to give warmth, not to consume. It was a promise. I stood at the top of the ramp of the Wanderlust, the engines humming softly, ready for departure. The entire conservatory, it seemed, had come to see me off. They stood in the pre-dawn light, not in rigid formations, but in small, quiet groups, a crowd of new friends, old enemies, and complicated allies. As the ramp began to rise, a small figure broke from the crowd and ran towards the ship, waving something in her hand. It was Nico. She ran as fast as her little legs could carry her, her face a mixture of sorrow and fierce determination. She held up the den charm, A final, silent plea. I raised my hand and placed it against the cockpit's view screen. My eyes locked on her. I could not give her the answer she wanted, but I could give her the promise she deserved. "Protect the den," I whispered to the empty cockpit, my voice thick. "Protect each other." The ship lifted off the ground, ascending into the pale, morning sky. The faces below grew smaller and smaller, until they were just a sea of bright, colorful specks. The last thing I saw was a tiny figure, standing alone, waving a small, woven charm at the departing stars. Space is vast, but news travels fast. In the quiet solitude of the Wanderlust's cockpit, the galaxy felt distant, a swirling, silent abstraction on the other side of the reinforced view screen. But on my datapad, it was a clamorous, chaotic, and cautiously hopeful place. The story of the Kitsukami War Conservatory's sudden, bloodless revolution had become a minor sensation on the fringe world news feeds. They called it the Cedar Reformation. Journalists and military analysts were having a field day with the Den Code, dissecting its simple, elegant principles. A leading publication in the Alliance Core Worlds had run a feature piece titled "The Humane Warrior: Can a Fox Planet Philosophy End Brutality in Asymmetric Warfare Delegations from Other Independent Military Academies, places that also train the young and desperate for a life of conflict, were already petitioning the new Provisional Council for permission to send observers. The seeds of change, planted in a bed of chili powder and desperation, were beginning to sprout across the sector. I watched a broadcast of Kale Oren's trial. She stood before the Council of Clans, not in a cage, but in a simple, unadorned chamber. She was her own defense. She did not plead for mercy. She argued for necessity. She spoke of a hostile galaxy, of dwindling resources, of the long, slow decline of their people's influence. "I offered our children a future," she said. Her voice a cold, clear bell, ringing with absolute conviction. A future of strength and relevance. The methods were harsh, yes. The choices were difficult. But I did what was necessary for our survival. The human gave you a beautiful dream of mercy. I gave you a tool to ensure you would live long enough to have such dreams. She pleaded guilty to the charge of unlawful imprisonment and psychological manipulation of a minor of noble blood. A calculated move that acknowledged Ari's new status. But on the broader charges of treason and conspiracy, she pleaded not guilty, framing her actions as a painful but necessary patriotism. The council had recessed to deliberate. The verdict was still pending, and the question of what to do with a monster who believed she was a savior hung heavy in the galactic consciousness. It was a debate, I realized, between justice and understanding, a line that was far blurrier than I had ever wanted to believe. I turned off the datapad and leaned back in my pilot's chair. The familiar hum of the ship a comforting presence. The journey back to the Terran Belt was long. It gave a man too much time to think. I opened my personal log, the screen casting a soft blue light on my face. Log entry, Adrian Hale. I do not know what day it is. Does it matter? Out here, time is just the space between stars. I came out here looking for a fight. I thought I was looking for revenge, for some kind of cosmic payback for the ghosts of Emberfall. I thought my enemy was a system, a brutal philosophy of war, and I fought it with the only tools I had. Not with bigger guns or faster ships, but with tricks, with leverage, with a stubborn refusal to play by the rules. I have been thinking a lot about strength. The Kitsune believe strength is in their speed, their senses, their warrior's spirit. It is a sharp, beautiful, and ultimately fragile thing. I saw its limits. I saw it break. And I am left wondering what human strength is. We are not the fastest or the strongest. We have no natural weapons. Our senses are dull. If you put one of us and one of them in an empty room, we would lose every time. But we have Something else. We have a kind of relentless durability. We can absorb a shocking amount of pain and keep getting back up. We can look at an unbreakable system, find the one tiny crack, and then spend a lifetime patiently, stubbornly, tapping at it until the whole thing shatters. And maybe, just maybe, our greatest strength is the most illogical one of all. It is the ability to feel someone else's pain and decide that it is more important than our own. It is the ability to look at the ashes of a tragedy like Emberfall, to carry that grief and that anger, and to choose, in the end, to build a new set of rules instead of just a bigger funeral pyre. Our strength is not in our claws or our fangs. It is in the quiet, impossible decision to turn our own suffering into a law that protects someone else. I closed the log, the sentiment feeling both true and profoundly incomplete. My eyes drifted up to the small, woven cedar charm hanging above the console. Nico's gift, my anchor. Before I archived the Emberfall data core for good, I decided to run one last, deep-level diagnostic. It was an old pilot's habit. Never trust a system until you have stress-tested it to its breaking point. I was not looking for anything new. I just wanted to wipe it clean, to close that chapter of my life completely. The diagnostic ran for hours, sifting through the corrupted files, the fragmented logs, the ghosts of my old ship. I had fallen into a light sleep when a soft, insistent chime woke me. My screen was flashing with a warning I had never seen before. Data integrity anomaly, detected dormant partition unsealed. I sat up, my heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy rhythm. A dormant partition, hidden, triple encrypted, buried so deep under layers of corrupted data that our initial scans had missed it completely. It must have been damaged in the crash, its security protocols slowly decaying until the deep diagnostic finally broke them. With trembling fingers, I opened the file. It was small, just a single data frame, a final addendum to the Emberfall mission plan. It contained a single line of code, the true, unredacted authorization signature for the entire operation. It was not the War Council's mark. It was not Kale Oren's. It was something else. A complex, elegant, and chillingly familiar string of logic. It was the same tactical signature I had recognized before, the one I had thought was the personal flourish of a rogue general. But it was not a signature. It was a watermark. My blood ran cold. I ran the watermark against every known intelligence database, military and corporate, and this time, I got a match. It was not Kitsune. It was not from any known alien military. It was human. The watermark belonged to a proprietary piece of software known as the Cassandra algorithm. It was a predictive warfare engine, developed decades ago during the early days of human interstellar expansion. It was designed to simulate conflicts, predict enemy behavior, and generate optimal strategies with ruthless efficiency. It was also deemed too dangerous, too devoid of ethical constraints, and was officially decommissioned and all known copies supposedly destroyed. But it had not been destroyed. It had been sold. The buyer was an obscure, now defunct shell corporation with ties to the black market arms trade. The Cassandra algorithm, the most sophisticated and immoral war machine ever conceived by human minds, had been let loose upon the galaxy. The Emberfall massacre had not been planned by the War Council. It had been designed by a human ghost in the machine, a piece of software that saw living beings as nothing more than variables in an equation of power. The War Council had simply bought the plan and put it into action. I stared at the screen, the cockpit of my ship suddenly feeling like the coldest, loneliest place in the universe. The pieces of my life, the certainties I had clung to, reassembled themselves into a new, hideous picture. I had gone to Kitsukami as a victim of a terrible alien atrocity. I had stood up to their broken, militaristic culture. I had taught them a better way, a more humane way, drawing on the very things I believed made my own species special. I had used human ingenuity to heal a wound in another society. And now, I knew, with a certainty that was like a physical sickness, that the wound had been inflicted by humanity in the first place. The irony was a staggering, crushing weight. My entire quest, my personal crusade, had been a clean-up operation for the sins of my own people. The monster I had been hunting was not out there, among the stars. It was born in a lab on Earth. The question that had driven me for 20 years, who was responsible for Emberfall, had been answered. And the answer was we were. My hands felt like lead as I moved to the comms panel. I had to tell them. They deserved to know the whole, ugly truth. I packaged the new data, the final, damning piece of the puzzle, and encrypted it. I addressed it to Chancellor Ariana Sablefire and Chief Engineer Tamsin Pike. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I composed the message. What could I possibly say? I am sorry that my people sold your oppressors the knife they used to stab you. In the end, I kept it simple. We got half the job done. I wrote, the other half is on me. I sent the message and watched the confirmation light blink, a tiny green star disappearing into the void. Then, I walked to the navigation console. My original course was set for the Sol system, for the familiar comforts of the Terran belt, for home. But my definition of home had changed. I wiped the destination from the computer. My new search query was for a name, the name of the defunct shell corporation that had bought the Cassandra algorithm. It took the ship's computer a few minutes to sift through the cold, dark archives of corporate history. But it found a trail, a series of acquisitions, of asset transfers, of shell corporations within shell corporations. A tangled, deliberate web of obfuscation. But at the center of the web was a single, still active entity. A highly respected, Earth-based technology conglomerate called Prognostic Solutions. My fingers typed in the new destination. The ship's computer plotted a new course, a red line cutting across the star chart, not towards the safety of the core, but towards the dark, unknown territory of corporate espionage, and a fight I was woefully unprepared for. The ship's engines shifted their pitch, a low thrum that vibrated through the deck plates as the Wanderlust slowly, deliberately, changed its direction. A message notification blinked on my console. It was a reply from Kitsukami, from Ari. I opened it. The message was short, but it contained a universe. The den light is always on. Adrian, it read, when your work is done, come back. Below the text was an attached image file. It was a scan of a formal document, a newly drafted treaty of interspecies cooperation and mutual defense, a promise to share the principles of the Den Code with any who would listen. It was signed with Ari's full, elegant signature, and next to hers was a second, much smaller signature, a joyful, slightly messy splash of red ink, applied with what was unmistakably the tip of a small, fluffy tail. A sad, weary smile touched my lips. I looked up at the cedar charm hanging in front of the view screen. It swayed gently with the ship's movement, a small, steadfast piece of a home I had found and a promise I had to keep. My new mission was clear. My war was not over. It had just changed. The first half was for them. This next half was for us. I settled back into the pilot's chair, my hands resting on the controls, my eyes on the endless, star-dusted darkness ahead. The journey would be long. It would be dangerous. But for the first time in a long time, I was not running from my past. I was flying towards a future. If they ask why humans are fearsome, tell them this: we laugh in the hurricane, and we build homes for children in the middle of a battlefield.